My husband's mistress showed up at our anniversary dinner wearing the diamond bracelet meant for me. Surprise, darling, she smirked, expecting me to break down. Instead, I calmly pulled out a USB drive. The prenup has an infidelity clause, I said, and my investigator has proof. His face went pale as waiters became witnesses. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, a vision in midnight blue silk that hugged my figure in all the right places. At 45, I still turned heads, though lately the only head I wanted to turn belonged to my husband, Dominic. That hadn't happened in a while. Tonight was our 20th anniversary, and I'd chosen this dress deliberately, sophisticated but powerful. Not the vulnerable red number Dominic had suggested I wear. He always did prefer me looking soft, pliable. "You look stunning, Mrs. Reynolds," our housekeeper Martha said from the doorway. "Thank you," I replied, fastening diamond studs to my ears. My neck remained bare, waiting for the diamond bracelet Dominic had poorly hidden in his desk drawer 3 weeks ago. I'd found it while searching for something else entirely: evidence. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of calculated revenge and personal empowerment, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us continue sharing tales of women who refuse to be underestimated. Now, let's watch as Holly transforms 20 years of betrayal into the perfect anniversary surprise. My hands trembled slightly as I applied my lipstick. Not from nervousness, but from a cold, calculated anger that had been building for 6 months. I steadied them, reminding myself that tonight required absolute control. Control had become my closest companion lately. I remembered the exact moment everything changed. It was a Tuesday in January, rain pattering against the windows of our company's downtown office. As Chief Financial Officer of Reynolds Enterprises, though my official title was Vice President because Dominic thought CFO sounded too intimidating for a woman, I'd been reviewing quarterly expense reports. A $12,000 charge from Cartier flagged my attention. No business reason, no client gift notation. Strange timing, I thought. My birthday had passed, Christmas was months away, and our anniversary wasn't until July. When I casually mentioned it over dinner, Dominic's explanation came too quickly: client appreciation gift for the Hendersons. Margaret loves Cartier. I'd nodded, smile fixed in place. The next day I called Margaret Henderson myself, asking about her beautiful new Cartier piece, under the guise of wanting to get something similar. Her confusion confirmed my suspicions. That evening I accessed Dominic's email when he was in the shower. His password hadn't changed in years. Holly Baby 2004, our wedding year. The man could build a technology empire but couldn't bother with password security. The confirmation came in the form of an email receipt, followed by a thread between Dominic and my executive assistant, Jessica Parker. "She'll love it," Jessica had written. "Almost as much as I love what you got me last month." Their exchanges were nauseating in their intimacy. Jessica, 28, brilliant, ambitious. I'd hired her myself 2 years ago, mentored her, shared business strategies over late-night takeout in the office. All while she was sleeping with my husband. A car horn outside pulled me back to the present. Dominic was already downstairs, probably checking his watch impatiently. I took one final look in the mirror, picked up the small clutch containing the USB drive and squared my shoulders. "Game time," I whispered to my reflection. "Reservations are at 8, Holly," Dominic called up the stairs. "We don't want to be late." The irony wasn't lost on me. Dominic Reynolds, chronically late to family dinners and school events, suddenly concerned about punctuality. But tonight was special. He'd reserved the private dining room at La Maison, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. A room that, unbeknownst to him, I'd called ahead to modify. More tables had been added around ours, filled with random diners, who were actually business associates, friends, and 2 journalists from the business section of the Tribune. People whose opinion of Dominic mattered. The drive downtown was filled with meaningless small talk. Dominic was animated, almost giddy, praising my appearance with an enthusiasm that once would have warmed my heart. Now I recognized it as performance. The same charm he turned on for board meetings and investor pitches. "You really outdid yourself with this reservation," I said, gazing out at the Chicago skyline. "La Maison on a Friday night? Must have pulled some strings." "Only the best for our 20th, he replied, reaching for my hand. I let him take it, noticing how his thumb caressed my bare wrist. I have something special for you. Something worthy of the woman behind the man. The phrase made my stomach turn. Behind the man. As if I hadn't built Reynolds Enterprises alongside him. As if my business degree and financial acumen hadn't saved the company during the recession while Dominic was busy whining and dining clients. The restaurant was a golden glow of chandeliers and candlelight. The maitre d' greeted us warmly, leading us to the modified private room where several tables were already occupied. Dominic frowned slightly at the change but quickly recovered his composure. Mr. Reynolds, our regular server Antonio, approached with champagne. And the lovely Mrs. Reynolds. Happy anniversary to you both. We clinked glasses and Dominic launched into reminiscing about our early days. How we'd met in college, how I'd believed in his vision when no one else did. It was a narrative he'd perfected over the years, painting himself as the visionary and me as the supportive wife. Never mentioning that it was my family's investment that launched the company, my connections that secured our first major clients. I was nodding along, playing my part when I felt the air in the room shift. Dominic's eyes moved past me, widening slightly, a micro-expression of panic quickly replaced by forced nonchalance. I didn't need to turn around to know. Jessica had arrived. She approached our table in a black dress that cost more than most junior executives make in a month. But it wasn't the dress that caught my attention. It was the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. My bracelet. The exact design I'd admired in a Cartier window 6 months ago while shopping with Dominic. Surprise, darling, she smirked, eyes fixed on me, clearly expecting a breakdown, a scene, tears, something to make me look unstable in front of everyone. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm settle over me. The final piece had fallen into place. I'd suspected she might show up tonight. The hotel reservation in Dominic's name 3 blocks away was a clue, but the bracelet was an unexpected gift. Jessica, I said coolly, what a surprise. I don't recall seeing your name on the reservation. Dominic jumped in, his voice slightly higher than normal. Jessica was just dropping off some papers for Monday's presentation. Weren't you, Jessica? I watched her smile falter slightly. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. That bracelet is stunning, I continued, my voice carrying across the now silent room. Cartier, isn't it? Exactly the one I pointed out last winter. Jessica's hand moved to cover the bracelet instinctively. Dominic's face had lost its color. With deliberate slowness, I reached into my clutch and extracted the small black USB drive, placing it on the table between us. The prenup has an infidelity clause, I said clearly, making sure everyone in the room could hear. And my investigator has proof, not just of this affair but of the 3 before it. And something far more interesting buried in the company financials. I turned to face our audience. Would anyone like to hear about the Reynolds Enterprises shadow accounts before the SEC does? Dominic's face went from pale to gray as waiters became witnesses to the public execution of his marriage, his reputation, and potentially his freedom. The silence that fell over the restaurant was deafening. I watched as Dominic's face contorted, his usual confident facade crumbling beneath the weight of exposure. 20 years of marriage flashed before my eyes. Not just the betrayal of the present moment, but the slow erosion of what we'd built together. Holly, please, he whispered, reaching for my hand. We can discuss this privately. I pulled away, my mind drifting back to Northwestern University, 1999. I was 22, a summa cum laude economics graduate with offers from 3 investment banks. Dominic was the charming business major with big dreams and mediocre grades, but when he spoke about technology ventures, his passion was infectious. When he proposed the summer after graduation, I shelved my Wall Street ambitions to support his vision for a tech startup. You're the brains, Holly Berry, he'd say in those early days, poring over business plans at our tiny kitchen table. I'm just the pretty face who'll sell it. It had been a joke then. It became our reality. There's nothing to discuss, I replied coldly, watching Jessica sink into a nearby chair, her earlier confidence evaporating. The time for discussion was before you gave my executive assistant my anniversary gift. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica was essentially a younger version of myself, ambitious, analytically brilliant, eager to prove herself. I'd recognized those qualities when I hired her, saw myself in her determination. I'd never imagined she would literally try to replace me in every aspect of my life. Reynolds Enterprises exists because of my family's seed money, I continued, my voice steady. My father's connections secured our first 3 clients. My economics background built the financial structure that saved us during the 2008 crash. Across the room, I noticed Bernard Wilson from the Chicago Business Journal scribbling notes. Good. Let there be a record. Year by year, I had gradually taken over the operational backbone of Reynolds Enterprises. While Dominic glad-handed clients and charmed investors, I developed the financial models that kept us profitable, restructured departments for efficiency, and quietly pioneered the data analytics division that now generated 60% of our revenue. Remember the Peterson acquisition? I asked, addressing the room as much as Dominic. The one that put us on the map nationally? Dominic's jaw tightened. He knew where this was going. I spent 6 months analyzing their vulnerabilities, structuring the perfect offer. I created the entire acquisition strategy. But who got the cover of Tech Innovators magazine? Who accepted the industry award? Holly, you never wanted the spotlight, he attempted, desperation creeping into his voice. No, I was told the spotlight wasn't my place, I corrected. That clients preferred dealing with you. That investors would be more comfortable with a male CEO. I turned to Jessica. Is that what he told you too? That you'd be the power behind the throne, making him look good while staying in the shadows? Her expression confirmed my suspicions. My stomach clenched, remembering the exact moment I'd realized Jessica wasn't just a mistress. She was my replacement in waiting. 3 months ago, I'd overheard Dominic on the phone in his home office. Once Holly's out of the picture, we'll restructure the executive team. You've already proven you can handle her responsibilities. I stood frozen outside the door, hand covering my mouth to prevent any sound escaping. The board trusts my judgment. They'll accept whatever narrative we give them. The next day, I contacted Patricia Monroe, the sharpest divorce attorney in Chicago. Our first meeting had been eye-opening. You're in a stronger position than you realize, Patricia had said, reviewing our prenuptial agreement. There's an infidelity clause Dominic probably forgot about. His father insisted on it, ironically to protect him from gold diggers. I remembered laughing bitterly at that. His father always did underestimate me. This clause entitles you to 50% of all assets plus an additional 10% of the company valuation for each proven instance of infidelity, Patricia continued. With proper evidence, you could own controlling interest in Reynolds Enterprises. That meeting changed everything. I went from devastated wife to strategic opponent, gathering evidence methodically while maintaining a perfect facade of ignorance. I hired Michael Dawson, a former FBI forensic accountant turned private investigator, who documented Dominic's rendezvous with Jessica and uncovered 3 previous affairs. More disturbing were the financial irregularities Michael found. Offshore accounts, questionable transfers, client funds temporarily borrowed, then replaced before quarterly audits. Mrs. Reynolds, Antonio the server approached our table tentatively, breaking my reverie. Would you like me to escort Miss Parker out? Before I could answer, Jessica stood up. This is ridiculous. Dominic, tell her the truth about us, about the company plans. Company plans? I raised an eyebrow. You mean the restructuring where I'm pushed out? Or perhaps the plan to attribute my analytics framework to yourself in next quarter's shareholder presentation? Her eyes widened. I'd accessed Dominic's cloud storage weeks ago, finding presentation drafts that credited Jessica with my innovations. The ultimate betrayal wasn't sexual. It was professional. 20 years of building something from nothing, only to be erased from its history. Holly, Dominic's voice dropped to a pleading whisper. Think about what you're doing. This company is our legacy. No, I corrected him, standing to address everyone present. Reynolds Enterprises was built on my ideas, my strategies, and my silent acceptance of staying in the background. That ends tonight. I turned to Bernard Wilson, the journalist. I have documentation of systematic financial improprieties at Reynolds Enterprises, orchestrated by CEO Dominic Reynolds. I'm prepared to provide full disclosure to regulatory authorities. Dominic's face drained of all remaining color. He knew exactly what I had found. You wouldn't, he whispered. Those were temporary measures. Everything was replaced. Just like I was to be replaced? I asked quietly, feeling the weight of 2 decades of being undervalued. You built our empire on sand, Dominic. And tonight the tide has come in. A wave of murmurs rippled through the restaurant as my words hung in the air. For a moment no one moved. I remained standing, shoulders back, the USB drive still on the table between us like a grenade with its pin pulled. You've made your point, Dominic finally said, his voice lowered but tinged with growing anger. Let's discuss this somewhere private. I shook my head slowly. Privacy has served your purposes for too long. Looking back, the drive to the restaurant had been a masterclass in irony. Dominic had been particularly attentive, his hand occasionally squeezing my knee as he drove through downtown Chicago, pointing out the new skyscraper being built by one of our clients. 20 years. He'd mused, genuine warmth in his voice. Remember our first anniversary? That tiny Italian place in Evanston when we could barely afford the bill? I had remembered, of course. Back then we truly were partners. I'd worn a dress I'd saved for 3 months to buy, and Dominic had presented me with a simple silver bracelet engraved with our initials. We'd dreamed together that night, planning our empire over cheap Chianti. The best is yet to come, Holly, he'd said in the car tonight, completely oblivious to what awaited him. I'd simply smiled and checked my lipstick in the visor mirror, mentally rehearsing my moves for the evening ahead. La Maison had been the perfect setting for tonight's revelation. Not just because of its reputation as Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, but because of how meticulously I'd planned the seating arrangements. I'd called the owner, Maurice, personally 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Reynolds, we had planned the small private dining room for your anniversary as Mr. Reynolds requested, Maurice had said. I'd prefer something more inclusive, I'd replied. Perhaps the large private room instead? With several tables. Of course, but your husband specifically requested privacy. It's my anniversary too, Maurice, I'd said softly. And I've prepared a surprise that requires an audience. A substantial donation to Morris's favorite charity had secured his cooperation. The guest list had been equally deliberate. Jonathan and Lisa Meyer, our oldest friends who'd been suspecting Dominic's infidelity for years. Richard Henderson, our largest investor. Bernard Wilson from the Chicago Business Journal. And Stephanie Winters, a senior partner at Goldman Sachs who'd been courting me to join their executive team for months. Now, as the reality of his situation sank in, Dominic's face shifted from shock to calculation. I recognized that look. He was formulating a counter-strategy, the same expression he wore during difficult board meetings. Ladies and gentlemen, he addressed the room with a forced chuckle, I apologize for this uncomfortable situation. My wife is understandably upset about a personal matter, but I'm afraid she's mixing business accusations with marital problems. Jessica remained frozen in her chair, the diamond bracelet glinting under the chandelier lights. Is that why you had me prepare financial documentation for the SEC investigation, Dominic? I asked loudly. As a personal matter? His smile faltered. 2 weeks ago I'd casually mentioned preparing documentation, just in case the SEC had questions about certain transactions. He dismissed my concerns, never suspecting I was the one who had anonymously tipped off the regulatory agency. Holly, you're making serious allegations without context, Dominic attempted, glancing nervously at Richard Henderson, whose investment firm controlled 20% of our company's shares. Perhaps we should review the context together, I suggested, picking up the USB drive and turning to our audience. 3 years ago, Dominic authorized the temporary borrowing of client development funds to cover personal real estate purchases. The money was returned before the quarterly audit, but the transaction records weren't completely erased. Richard Henderson's expression darkened. Is this true, Reynolds? Before Dominic could respond, Jessica suddenly found her voice. Holly, please. This isn't about the company. This is about your jealousy. Why jealousy? I laughed, genuinely amused by her naivety. Jessica, do you think you're the first? The files on this drive document his affair with Claire from marketing in 2018, Melissa from the Denver office in 2020, and that lovely weekend in Miami with the pharmaceutical rep whose name he never bothered to learn. I turned my attention back to Dominic. Did you tell Jessica about the infidelity clause in our prenup? How each documented affair costs you an additional 10% of company shares. Dominic's expression confirmed he'd either forgotten or never bothered to read the fine print his father had insisted upon. The irony was delicious. The clause meant to protect the Reynolds fortune from a gold-digging wife would now transfer controlling interest to me. This is absurd, Dominic sputtered, but his trademark confidence was crumbling. Those financial moves were approved by the board. The board wasn't informed, I corrected calmly. I checked the minutes of every meeting for the past 5 years. You acted unilaterally, thinking no one would notice because you keep your wife, the financial expert, busy with operational details instead of governance. Jonathan Meyer, our longtime friend and a board member himself, leaned forward. Is that accurate, Dominic? The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Even the waitstaff stood motionless, caught in the drama unfolding before them. Antonio, our regular server, looked particularly stunned. He'd served us on countless date nights, anniversary celebrations, always the picture-perfect power couple. Throughout the confrontation, I maintained a composure that had taken months of preparation to achieve. I'd practiced this moment in front of my bathroom mirror, rehearsed my words while driving alone, trained myself to speak without my voice breaking. This calm wasn't natural. It was cultivated through countless sleepless nights when anger and heartbreak threatened to consume me. This USB contains copies of all relevant financial records, documented affairs, and evidence of corporate misconduct, I announced, placing it back on the table. My attorney has the originals with instructions to deliver them to the SEC, the board of directors, and the appropriate media outlets at 9 o'clock tonight unless I call to stop it. I checked my watch deliberately. That's 45 minutes from now. What do you want? Dominic finally asked, his voice barely audible. What I've earned, I replied simply. Controlling interest in the company I built, public acknowledgement of my contributions, and a divorce that reflects the true nature of our partnership. Jessica began to cry silently, the diamond bracelet now looking more like handcuffs than jewelry on her wrist. And Jessica, I added, unable to resist one final twist of the knife. He told Claire from marketing she was the love of his life too. Right before he replaced her with Melissa. Jessica wiped at her tears with a napkin, smearing expensive mascara across her cheekbones. The perfectly composed facade she'd worn upon arrival had completely disintegrated. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. This is extortion, Dominic said, finding his voice again as he glanced around at the witnesses I'd carefully assembled. His hand reached for his water glass, but it trembled so badly he knocked it over instead. Water cascaded across the white tablecloth, a small flood that no one moved to stop. No, Dominic, I corrected calmly. This is consequences. Richard Henderson stood up from his table, approaching ours with the deliberate pace of a man who controlled billions in investments. He'd known us for 15 years, had been one of our first major backers. I'd like to see what's on that drive, Holly, he said, ignoring Dominic completely. Richard, this is a private matter, Dominic began. Not when it involves company funds, it isn't, Richard cut him off sharply. Not when my investment firm has a fiduciary responsibility to our clients who've backed Reynolds Enterprises. He turned back to me. How long has this been going on? The financial irregularities? 3 years that I can document, I answered. The pattern of affairs? Nearly our entire marriage. Stephanie Winters from Goldman Sachs approached next, her expression a mixture of professional concern and personal sympathy. Holly, that executive position we discussed last month is still open if you're interested. I smiled, gratitude warming my chest. 3 weeks ago, I'd had lunch with Stephanie under the guise of discussing potential investment opportunities. What I'd really been doing was establishing a safety net, ensuring I had options regardless of tonight's outcome. This is ridiculous, Dominic snapped, desperation edging into his voice. Holly has clearly had some kind of breakdown. Jessica is my executive assistant. This is nothing more than paranoid accusations. Save it, Dom, Jonathan Meyer interrupted, coming to stand beside me. His wife Lisa followed, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. We've known for years. We saw you with that marketing girl at the Christmas party in 2018. Lisa spotted you and Jessica at the Peninsula Hotel in April. And you didn't tell me? I asked, genuine surprise breaking through my composure for the first time that evening. Lisa squeezed my shoulder. We tried to hint at it, Holly, but you always changed the subject. We figured you either knew and were handling it your way or didn't want to know. I didn't want to know, I admitted quietly, until I couldn't ignore it anymore. The revelation that my closest friends had seen the signs long before I acknowledged them hit me harder than I expected. All those sympathetic glances, the careful avoidance of certain topics, the extra invitations to girls' nights out. They'd been waiting for me to be ready. Dominic's face had turned from pale to flushed. I recognized the signs of his anger building, the tightening of his jaw, the slight flare of his nostrils. He'd always had a temper, though he kept it carefully controlled in public. "This is a coordinated attack," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You've all been planning this, haven't you? You think you can push me out of my own company?" "Your company?" Bernard Wilson from the Business Journal had been quietly taking notes, but now he looked up with journalistic interest. "Wasn't Reynolds Enterprises built with Mrs. Reynolds' family seed money? Isn't she listed as co-founder in the incorporation documents?" I hadn't planted that question, but I could have kissed Bernard for asking it. The narrative was unraveling faster than even I had anticipated. Jessica stood suddenly, the diamond bracelet catching the light. "I should go," she mumbled, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "Sit down," Dominic ordered, his control slipping. "This isn't over." "It is for me," she replied, a flash of dignity breaking through her humiliation. "You told me Holly knew nothing about the business, that she was just a figurehead. You said she'd accept a divorce settlement and walk away." More murmurs rippled through the restaurant. Dominic looked like he might explode. I reached for my phone, my fingers steady as I dialed a number I'd memorized weeks ago. The restaurant fell silent as I put the call on speaker. "Patricia Monroe's office," came the crisp voice of my attorney's assistant. "This is Holly Reynolds. Please proceed with filing as discussed." My voice was clear, unhurried. "Yes, Mrs. Reynolds. The documents are prepared. We'll file electronically within the hour. The temporary restraining order regarding company assets should be in effect by morning." I ended the call and looked directly at Dominic. That was just the first step. The divorce papers cite the infidelity clause. The corporate filing documents my intellectual property claims on the analytics framework, the client management system, and the acquisition strategy model I developed. All currently attributed to you in company materials. Dominic's expression shifted from anger to panic. "You can't prove those were your ideas." "Actually, I can," I said, feeling a sense of liberation wash over me. "I've kept every notebook, every initial draft, every email where you asked me to explain complex models to you so you could present them as your own. 20 years of documentation, Dominic." I turned to Richard Henderson. "The analytics framework that increased client retention by 43% last year? The acquisition model that made our purchase of TechVantage possible at half its market value? The financial restructuring that saved us during the 2008 crash? All me." Richard's eyebrows rose. "Is this true, Dominic?" Dominic's silence was confirmation enough. Jonathan Meyer shook his head slowly. "The board needs to know about this, Dom. All of it." "I'll call an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," Richard said, his investor's mind already calculating the implications. I stood up, gathering my clutch in the USB drive. "I believe my 45 minutes are up. I've made my position clear." I addressed the room at large. "I'm not just fighting for my fair share of Reynolds Enterprises. I'm taking back what was mine all along, recognition for the work I've done, the company I built." Turning to Dominic one last time, I removed my wedding ring and placed it next to the overturned water glass. "Happy anniversary." I walked out of La Maison with my head high, aware of every eye following my exit. The night air felt crisp against my skin, carrying the promise of freedom. I hadn't anticipated how light I would feel, as if I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying for years without realizing its weight. Behind me, I heard Dominic calling my name, his voice edged with desperation, but I didn't turn around. My driver, Marcus, was waiting by the curb as instructed, car door already open. "Everything all right, Mrs. Reynolds?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. "Better than all right," I replied, sliding into the back seat. "Take me to the Langham, please." I'd booked a suite 2 days earlier, knowing I wouldn't be returning to our penthouse tonight. As Marcus pulled away from the curb, my phone began buzzing incessantly. I glanced at the screen. Calls from board members, business partners, friends. News traveled fast in our circles. I silenced the phone, needing time to process what had just happened. By morning, the Chicago business community was ablaze with the news. Bernard Wilson's article in the Business Journal was measured but devastating, detailing serious allegations of financial impropriety and intellectual property theft at Reynolds Enterprises. My phone had over 50 messages by the time I awoke. I answered only 3: Richard Henderson, Stephanie Winters, and Patricia Monroe. The board has called an emergency meeting for noon, Richard informed me. Dominic is trying to paint this as a personal vendetta, but the financial documentation you provided is convincing. Will you be there? I asked, gazing out at the Chicago skyline from my hotel room. I wouldn't miss it, Richard replied. And Holly? For what it's worth, I always thought you were the brains of the operation. The call with Patricia confirmed that the temporary restraining order was in place, freezing company assets and preventing Dominic from making any major financial or operational decisions without board approval. The divorce filing had been processed. The wheels of justice were turning inexorably. I spent the morning carefully returning calls to key clients and partners, people whose relationships I'd cultivated over years. They'd received Dominic's version of events already. His assistant had been busy making damage control calls since dawn. Holly, Dominic says you're having some kind of breakdown, Charles Emerson, our oldest client, said cautiously. Charles, we've known each other for 15 years, I replied calmly. Have you ever known me to be unstable or irrational? No, he admitted after a pause. You've always been the steadiest person in the room. Then perhaps you should consider why Dominic would characterize it that way, rather than addressing the evidence. By noon, I had secured the support of our 3 largest clients, who collectively represented 40% of our annual revenue. They wouldn't be taking their business elsewhere, regardless of the company's leadership changes. The relationships I'd carefully nurtured for years, often cleaning up after Dominic's overpromises, were paying dividends. The board meeting, which I attended virtually, was brutal and efficient. Faced with the evidence Patricia and I had compiled, including documentation of unauthorized financial transfers, the board voted to place Dominic on administrative leave pending a full investigation. I was named interim CEO. When I finally returned to our penthouse that evening to collect some personal belongings, Dominic was waiting. He looked disheveled, his perfectly maintained appearance now as rumpled as his reputation. You've destroyed everything, he said as I entered, his voice hoarse. 20 years of marriage thrown away for what? Revenge. I set my bag down, surveying the space that had been our home. The gleaming marble countertops, the custom furnishings, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their perfect view, our golden cage. This wasn't revenge, Dominic. This was justice. The board has suspended me, he said as if I might not know. I own company. Our company, I corrected. And yes, I know. I was at the meeting. He stared at me, truly seeing me perhaps for the first time in years. How long have you been planning this? Since the day I overheard you telling Jessica I'd be out of the picture soon, I replied. But the groundwork was laid by you years ago when you decided I was disposable. When you started taking credit for my work. When you began the affairs. Dominic collapsed onto the sofa, head in his hands. I never thought you'd fight back like this. You were always so accommodating. That was my mistake, I acknowledged, moving around the room to collect photographs and personal items. I allowed myself to become a prisoner in this golden cage we built. I convinced myself the luxury compensated for the loneliness, that professional success could replace personal fulfillment. I paused at a photo from our early days, both of us beaming at the camera, full of hope and genuine love. You know what the saddest part is? I loved you. Truly loved you. Even after I suspected the affairs, I tried to rationalize them away. It was only when I realized you planned to push me out of the company that I finally saw clearly. I never meant to hurt you, he said, the lie sounding hollow even to him. Yes, you did, I corrected gently. Maybe not at first, but eventually hurting me became incidental to getting what you wanted. That's worse in some ways. I continued gathering my things, feeling his eyes follow me around the room. This space, which had once felt like a symbol of our success, now seemed like an elaborate stage set, beautiful but ultimately false. What happens now? He finally asked, sounding lost. How I rebuild, I answered simply. The company, my life. Everything. As I prepared to leave, Dominic made one last attempt. We could still fix this, Holly. The board, the company, us. I could make amends. For a brief moment, I remembered the young man I'd fallen in love with, the dreams we'd shared. But that person was gone, replaced by the broken man before me who still couldn't fully acknowledge what he'd done. Goodbye, Dominic. Walking out of the penthouse, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also profound sadness for what had been lost. The golden cage that had once imprisoned me would now serve as Dominic's own prison of legal consequences and professional ruin. It wasn't a perfect victory. Nothing in life ever is. 2 days later, in my new office as interim CEO of Reynolds Enterprises, I reviewed the proposed rebranding strategy. The company would become Aurora Analytics, named after my grandmother who had provided the initial investment all those years ago. The logo would incorporate a rising sun, symbolic of new beginnings. As I signed the authorization forms, I glanced at the empty space on my finger where my wedding ring had been. 20 years of my life had been spent building this company alongside a man who never truly valued me. Now I would rebuild it on my own terms, reclaiming not just the business but myself in the process. The cage door was open, and I was finally free.